The top 10 most devastating battles of World War II. World War II was one of the deadliest and most destructive conflicts in history, marked by a series of catastrophic battles that had far-reaching consequences for the world. World War II was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. It was the deadliest conflict in human history, with an estimated 70 to 85 million fatalities. Here are 10 of the most devastating battles of World War II. Number 10. Battle of Guadalcanal. The Battle of Guadalcanal was a major battle fought between August 1942 and February 1943 in the Pacific theater of World War II. It was the first major offensive by Allied forces against Japan and resulted in a costly victory for the Allies. The battle was fought primarily on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, and involved heavy fighting on land, at sea, and in the air. The battle resulted in significant losses for both sides, with the Allies suffering over 7,000 casualties and the Japanese suffering over 20,000. Despite the high cost, the Allied victory at Guadalcanal established a foothold in the Pacific and paved the way for further Allied offensives against Japan. Number 9. Battle of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin was the final major battle of the European theater of World War II, fought between April and May 1945. It was a major conflict between Soviet and German forces for control of the German capital city of Berlin. The battle involved heavy fighting on the ground, as well as bombing raids and artillery fire, resulting in significant destruction of the city. The Soviet forces ultimately emerged victorious, capturing the city and forcing the German surrender on May 8, 1945. The Battle of Berlin is considered one of the bloodiest and most devastating battles of World War II, resulting in an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 Soviet casualties and over 22,000 German casualties. The battle effectively marked the end of the war in Europe and paved the way for the eventual Allied victory over Germany. Number 8. Battle of Okinawa. The Battle of Okinawa was a major battle fought between April and June 1945 in the Pacific theater of World War II. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War, involving over 180,000 American and Allied troops and over 1,500 ships. The battle was fought primarily on the island of Okinawa, located in the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, and involved heavy fighting on land, at sea, and in the air. The battle resulted in significant losses for both sides, with the Allies suffering over 72,000 casualties and the Japanese suffering over 100,000, including many civilian casualties. The battle was also marked by the widespread use of kamikaze attacks by the Japanese, causing significant damage to Allied ships. The Allied victory at Okinawa paved the way for the eventual invasion of Japan, which was ultimately avoided due to the Japanese surrender after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Number 7. Battle of Monte Cassino. The Battle of Monte Cassino was a major battle fought between January and May 1944 in Italy during World War II. The battle was fought by Allied forces against German forces who had fortified themselves in the mountains near the town of Cassino. The battle involved a series of offensives and counter-offensives, with heavy fighting on the ground, in the air, and with artillery. The battle resulted in significant losses for both sides, with the Allies suffering over 55,000 casualties and the Germans suffering over 20,000. The battle was particularly notable for the destruction of the historic Monte Cassino Abbey, which was heavily damaged by Allied bombing. The Allied victory at Monte Cassino was a significant step towards the liberation of Italy and the eventual Allied victory in Europe. Number 6. The Battle of Kursk. The Battle of Kursk, fought in July 1943, the Battle of Kursk was the largest tank battle in history, resulting in over 6,000 tanks destroyed and a Soviet victory that turned the tide of the Eastern Front. The Battle of Kursk was a major battle fought between July and August 1943 in the Eastern Front of World War II. The battle was fought between German forces and Soviet forces, with the objective of destroying the Soviet salient around the city of Kursk. The battle involved heavy fighting on the ground, with the Germans launching a massive tank offensive against the Soviet lines. The Soviet forces, however, were well prepared and had constructed extensive defensive positions, including minefields and anti-tank obstacles. The battle resulted in significant losses for both sides, with the Germans suffering over 50,000 casualties and the Soviets suffering over 200,000. The battle was the largest tank battle in history and marked a turning point in the Eastern Front, with the Soviet victory signaling the beginning of the Soviet advance towards Germany. Number 5. Siege of Leningrad. Siege of Leningrad, lasting from September 1941 to January 1944, the Siege of Leningrad resulted in over 1 million civilian casualties and is considered one of the deadliest sieges in history. The Siege of Leningrad was a prolonged military blockade of the city of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, in the Soviet Union by German and Finnish forces during World War II. The siege lasted for 872 days, from September 1941 to January 1944, and was one of the longest and most destructive sieges in history. The city suffered from severe shortages of food, fuel, and other essential supplies, and as a result, many civilians died from starvation, disease, and bombardment. Despite these challenges, the Soviet defenders managed to hold out against the German and Finnish forces, and eventually, the blockade was lifted in January 1944. The Siege of Leningrad resulted in an estimated 1.5 million civilian and military deaths, making it one of the deadliest battles of World War II. The siege also had a profound impact on the city and its people, shaping the post-war history of Leningrad and the Soviet Union. Number 4. The Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway was a naval battle fought between June 4 to 7, 1942, in the Pacific theater of World War II. The battle was fought between the Japanese and American naval forces and was a significant turning point in the war in the Pacific. The Japanese had planned to capture Midway Island and use it as a base to launch further attacks on American forces. However, American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications and were able to anticipate and prepare for the attack. The battle involved heavy fighting on the sea and in the air, with both sides suffering significant losses. However, the American forces were able to secure a decisive victory, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and effectively ending Japan's naval superiority in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway is considered a critical turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II, marking the beginning of the American advance towards Japan. Number 3. Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was a major battle fought in December 1944 during World War II. The battle was fought between German and Allied forces in the densely forested Ardennes region of eastern Belgium and northern Luxembourg. The German offensive was launched as a surprise attack against the Allied forces, with the objective of capturing the port city of Antwerp and splitting the Allied armies in two. The battle involved heavy fighting on the ground, with the Germans employing tanks and other armored vehicles to break through the Allied lines. Despite initial success, the German offensive was eventually halted by Allied forces, who regrouped and launched a counteroffensive that pushed the Germans back. The Battle of the Bulge was one of the largest and bloodiest battles fought by the Allies during World War II, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The battle was a significant turning point in the war in Europe, as it marked the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany's military offensive capabilities. Number 2. D-Day. D-Day, also known as the Normandy Landings, was a military operation conducted by Allied forces during World War II. The operation involved the invasion of Nazi-occupied France, with the objective of establishing a foothold on the European continent and ultimately liberating Western Europe from German control. The operation began on June 6, 1944, and involved the coordinated landing of thousands of Allied troops on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. The landings were preceded by extensive aerial and naval bombardment of the German defenses along the coast. The initial assault involved heavy fighting on the beaches, with the Allies facing stiff resistance from German forces. However, the Allied forces were eventually able to establish a foothold on the continent and begin their advance towards Germany. The D-Day landings were a significant turning point in the war, as they marked the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany's control of Western Europe. The operation was one of the largest amphibious invasions in history, involving over 156,000 Allied troops and resulting in thousands of casualties on both sides. Number 1. The Battle of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was a major battle fought between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front of World War II. The battle began in July 1942 and lasted until February 1943, and it was one of the largest and deadliest battles in the history of warfare. The Germans had launched a massive offensive aimed at capturing the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, a major industrial and transportation hub in the Soviet Union. The battle involved heavy fighting on the ground, with both sides suffering significant casualties. The fighting was often brutal and hand-to-hand, as the Germans attempted to capture the city's buildings and streets from the Soviet defenders. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, the Soviet forces were able to hold out against the German offensive, and eventually, they launched a counteroffensive that encircled and trapped the German forces in the city. The Germans suffered heavy losses and were forced to surrender in February 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was a major turning point in the war, as it marked the first major defeat of Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front and the beginning of the Soviet Union's counteroffensive that would eventually lead to Germany's defeat. The battle was also one of the deadliest in history, with an estimated 2 million casualties on both sides.